to the podcast of course, they make me crazy. We grew up with a bipolar mother addicted to pills who experienced a lot of hardships. We started this podcast to talk about our experiences with you. You can really start to feel lost and trapped in their world. And we're hoping our crazy, sometimes funny stories, living with someone like that, helps you to feel normal, whole, and happy again. If you have little ones around, though, this would be a good time to pop in your headphones. Our discussions are for adults only, please. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Of Course They Make Me Crazy. I'm April.
And I'm Amanda.
And we are so happy that you're joining us. Okay, so question for you off the bat. What's your mental health like? No, seriously, like when you hear that word mental health, do you think illness or do you think health? Right? Many of us go to the negative right away. So why is that? Well, Amanda and I have teamed up with Dr. Casey Delmara, also known as a mental health hacker, to talk about these things. So before Dr. Delmara truly joins us, though, I just want to say hi. Hi, Dr. Casey.
Hi, everybody. Super excited to be here today.
Awesome. Okay, so we want to give you a quick introduction to her, okay? So besides being totally cute and smart, if you popped on her or our social media sites and saw her picture, you know what I'm talking about. But she's also been an educator for 17 years. She's from Australia, best accent ever, as you just heard. And she noticed an increase in young people and parents struggling to cope with daily challenges, mental health issues and stress. Yes. So Dr. Casey earned her PhD from Victoria University and uncovered like the best ways to help people build resilience, developing coping skills to deal with stress. So after, struggling with her own struggles of depression and anxiety, she went on a mission to learn as much as she could to prevent herself and others from suffering from the burden of mental health issues and illnesses. So we are so happy. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, okay, excited having you here and introducing you for the first time to our listeners. It seems that many of us relate to people who have experienced similar struggles, right? So like Amanda and I, Amanda, I'm starting to talk about Eric for a quick second. And Eric is a big podcaster. And Amanda, what is his? It's Driven One Industries, right?
Yes. Yep.
And so he was talking about, getting help, special help like from doctors and just getting counseling and things like that. But he said the one thing a lot of his people struggle with is when they talk to a professional, they feel like they can't really relate to that person on the other side of the table or the other side of the room sitting across from them because they don't know if they've necessarily been in it, like the person, that's struggling. And what I loved about you is that you've been there, and you have struggled with things. And our listeners already know that Amanda and I grew up with a bipolar mother, and our family members addicted to alcohol and drugs and both. Right, Nance?
Yeah.
So, and that's how this podcast started. Some of our stories are comical, others are just, heart crushing, to be honest with you. But give us some insight into really what led you down to this career path.
Yeah, that's a great question because it has been a big journey. And I think, April, you're totally right. A lot of my clients really appreciate the fact that I have been through this myself and experienced myself and gone through the journey. And it's much easier to relate. It's one thing to conceptually understand how something works, but it's the other thing to actually experience it and have to go through it yourself. So I actually feel very blessed now looking back on experiencing the struggles because it's made me into the person I am today. But yeah, it wasn't the case at the time when I was struggling. It was absolutely horrendous. It was back in 2011, and yeah, it was a cold, dark winter back here in Australia, and I found myself, I just slipped into this deep, dark depression, and I was literally trapped in my bedroom for 3 months. I couldn't leave. I couldn't work. Um, I, I was really trapped by my mind more than anything. So, but what had happened is there was no real trigger. I didn't have, any sort of grief. I didn't have a big trauma in my life. I didn't have anything that was this huge trigger that normally people think that if you go into a depression or a state like that, that something bad has happened or there's been some kind of trauma. But for me, that wasn't the case. And looking back now, there was definitely red flags going on where I can see that it was the actions that I was taking or not taking that led me down that path. But there wasn't a huge trigger in that sense. So, I got to a point where I was lucky enough to have a really beautiful friend of mine really understand what was going on and coached me to go and get help. And so I went and sought professional help and was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And, that hearing those words, I nearly fell off my chair because it's not something that I'd ever even considered. And even in that state, I didn't think that I didn't know really what was going on. And it was kind of a real blur that time for me. But once I got professional help and realized that that was what was going on, I then went on this journey of self-experimentation about the healing journey of how I could help myself heal without getting medication,
Mm-hmm.
and really trying to find natural antidepressants and to pull myself out of that. So, I tried all of the different types of healing techniques, like, the more traditional types like talk therapy and self-help books and personal development courses, yoga retreats, you sort of name it, down that path. And then I also really tried the more extreme practices that not the typical ways, like plant medicines and silent meditation retreats and all of that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, I went really into this sort of journey of self-discovery, but at the same time, I went back into teaching and lecturing, and I was just seeing all of my students, whether they were adults or young people. I saw parents, but really struggling with mental health issues, struggling to manage themselves in their day to day. And I couldn't see what was going on. Why was this all happening? So that really triggered me to go on that journey of studying a PhD of how we could figure out what was going on with the mental health industry and how we could prevent it from happening. So be more proactive rather than this reactive mental health care system that we currently have in westernized culture, which is, wait until somebody has an issue, an illness or a disease, and then we look at treating later. And so that's a real disease-based model, and we want to sort of start to look at it as a proactive, holistic approach to mental health care. And so that's where my research really led me down that
Mm-hmm.
path. And and I suppose I'm sure it's the same in the US, but a lot of other westernized countries around the world. But, suicide is the leading cause of death of young Australians, 15 to sort of 45 years old. And that's absolutely tragic that we're getting to that point. And the fact that, COVID has happened, that's increased here in Australia. And I'm sure that's the same in the States. Would you say that
Absolutely.
that's correct? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So for those of you, because we might, by the time this airs, I don't, it's definitely not going to be over, but we are recording this in that, time frame. And it's interesting that you bring that up. Like I was touring our children's hospital here in the Denver, Colorado area, and they were in the process of building and adding on rooms. And I said, well, what are those for? And they had padded walls. And they said, we are getting teenagers in here left and right. Um, suicidal thoughts and things of that sort. So they had to add more rooms and, more space to accommodate the teens that are coming in suicidal. And that just shocked me because, being in Denver, Colorado, it's different. I've lived in so many cities around the US, like Cleveland, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Memphis, Tennessee. And when I'm in Denver, it just feels like everybody's happy. The sun is shining all the time. And, everybody seems physically healthy and, they're out playing sports and they're out walking. And then when I heard that, I was like, whoa, uh,
Mm.
shocker, and Amanda has a 13-year-old son, and he's as precious as they come. But Amanda, we worry about him, don't we?
Unfortunately, he does suffer from anxiety too.
Yeah,
Um, he's done therapy in the past, and she was a miracle worker. I mean, she was a true blessing. She,
yeah.
sh I mean, remember how he fell in love with her? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, not like in love, like, but he
yeah,
he really opened up to her, and she was a blessing to him. And so I get it. We see what you're seeing and what you're experiencing over there for sure, especially with COVID.
yeah.
Yeah, and look, there's this huge gap that I've been seeing, and this has come out through my research, but also through personal experience, where we have these amazing miracle workers, like you just said, Amanda, who are our traditional sort of talk therapists, which really help with trauma and the initial phase when people are going through something initially. But what we're seeing is this huge gap that's occurring where they're not actually teaching coping skills. And the reason I know that is because when I was lecturing at university and teaching teachers coming through and nurses coming through, they're not taught these specific coping skills in their training. So when they're out in the field and working directly with their clients or students, they're not teaching these skills because they were never taught it at university. So
Mhm.
there's this huge gap that happens. And some of my clients have nurses that come in for home care that, they're on the other end of the spectrum where they're really struggling with mental health conditions. And even the nurses that are coming in, they don't know how to teach coping skills. So they might talk to them about their medication and things like that, but they're not being taught how to really manage themselves in their day-to-day lives. And so that's where I come in, and I suppose that's my speciality, and my expertise is around helping people to really develop positive coping skills and be able to develop resilience and be able to manage in their home lives, so that they can really start to thrive rather than get back home after a therapy session and not know what to do.
That's awesome that you have that training because I, you're right. I don't think my son got any type of coping skills while he was in therapy.
Mm.
I don't think, there's nothing that I can think of that she had taught him to cope with when he had a meltdown, besides calling mom at 3 a.m. when he's at dad's house.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Casey. So when you were laying in bed in a dark room, trying to get yourself out of this dark place, what pulled you out of it? Like, how, if somebody is in it that hard and that deep, what can you tell them in order to, help them snap out of something like that?
Yeah, look, that is such a great question. And it's going to be different for everybody
Yeah.
depending on
Mhm.
their current circumstances and things like that. But in my experience, what happened to me was that I completely shut off from the world. I didn't know what was happening. It was a real, this. I was functioning on autopilot. I wasn't watching TV. I had the blinds were drawn. I slept a lot of the time. I ended up having to move back in with my mum, and my partner at the time was amazing, but I couldn't handle work and dealing with me as well. And so I moved back in with my mum, and she would bring me down food, and I wasn't even eating. There would be plates of food there. I just remember she'd come down and collect the next plate of food, and I just wouldn't eat, and I completely shut off. So, and at the time, when you're in it, you can become completely unaware that there's like this outside world that exists.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to get out of it, but I think it's breaking it down into small little steps. What helped me was I had my best friend support me through the process. She didn't take no for an answer. She came and was like, right, we're going for a walk outside. I was like, no, we're not. I can't even get upstairs. I haven't even had a shower today, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So we started small. So we started really small where I would leave. Instead of, she would come in and talk to me in my bedroom, and then we'd go up and we would go up into the lounge room and we'd talk there instead. And then, you know, it started that we'd eventually go outside and have a chat, and then we went for a walk. And so this is a coping skill that I call chunk it, where you break something down that's quite big. You know that you want to get to the point where you want to get outside, but that might just be too much at this point. So it's just breaking it down into small little achievable chunks of things that you can slowly do. So for me, I just set really small goals that helped me get out of it. So today I was like, right, I'm having a shower today. That's my goal. You know, I know that sounds really small, but for some people who are in that state, it's huge.
Mm-hmm.
You
Be
know,
Mm-hmm.
so
very
it's, yeah, it's breaking that down and saying, right, that's what I'm going to achieve today. And that little bit of self-confidence and trust that you build within yourself when you achieve that helps you to set something else up that's bigger. So then, you know, we go to the next point. And so, yeah, it's breaking it down. And I think the thing that happens that when we're going through these emotions, if we're not moving our body, the emotions and negativity can actually get stuck in our body. So movement is really important. And so I would just say that, you know, getting outside or moving your body in some kind of way, whether it's a short walk or just taking your dog outside to go to the toilet, whatever it might be, but some type of movement so that you're not laying down all the time.
Absolutely. So my whole thing was, growing up with my mother, and you and I, we all three of us discussed. Amanda and I grew up with two different moms. I grew up with a young, vibrant, hardworking mom that was go, go, go all the time. And then by the time Amanda came around, because we're 10 years apart, mom was a little different. She was addicted to pain pills. The bipolar had really, sunken deep inside her soul and body and mind. And she really wouldn't get off the couch. And so we grew up with two different people. And when I saw that side of my mom, sitting on the couch, not doing anything, smoking consistently, like a pack of cigarettes a day, downing a 12 pack of Diet Coke. My thing was, hell no, I'm not doing this. And I'd get up and I'd go running. And, you know, later on in life, I opened up a fitness studio. I was like, no, ain't happening to me. And and unfortunately, Amanda, and you were talking about your environment really does take a toll on you in some cases. And Amanda, at one point, she started living through, in a way, right, Mandy, like kind of the way mom was in a sense, but not totally.
I definitely inherited her depression and downness. I have gotten in bad slumps, nothing nearly as bad as what you went through, Case, with the what was it, 3 months you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still fight to this day. It's getting so much better now that I don't know if April told you, I've had 2 major hip surgeries in the past year. So now that I'm able to walk and do things, I'm starting to get into not yoga, meditation, and moving and doing more things. But yes, I would get in to those slumps like mom, where I would just want to take naps constantly, and I would think about the past, and it would get me down like mom would, because I did go
Mhm.
through, I was married for 10 plus years, so yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and environmentally, you know, there's one thing that when you're going through it yourself, but then when you're living with somebody that's got mental health issues or disorders, conditions, because you know, mental illness and mental health are two different things, and
Mhm.
we kind of there's a sort of a misinterpretation where people use those terms interchangeably, where they're talking about mental illness, but they actually refer to it as mental health, and it's not
Yeah.
the case. So, you know, we know that, yeah, mental illness is something that's being diagnosed that is a serious disorder or condition, and that has a different coping skills, that the way that you manage that versus, you know, mental health in a sense. And mental health is really on a spectrum, where we can have up one end people who are really thriving and flourishing with their mental health, and then on the other end of the spectrum, you know, you've got people who are really struggling and have poor mental health. But it doesn't matter if you have a diagnosed condition or not. You can still be really thriving and still have a mental health illness or mental illness,
Mhm.
but still be really thriving with your mental health, and vice versa. You may not have a diagnosed condition, but you can still have really poor mental health. And so it really happens with the environment, where you can slip between the two on the spectrum and slide down that negative spiral really quickly, unless you're protecting yourself from that environment and those environmental impacts.
It is very true, because I did move back home with my parents after I left my ex-husband, and definitely I'd get up and see mom on the couch sleeping, and it wouldn't help me any, or I'd go down to try to talk to or have a conversation, and whatever it was, it just wasn't a good, uplifting conversation that I would need.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely.
So yeah, definitely, it did make it. It did. But you can't bounce off of another person.
Right. You can't bounce off of them if they're low and you're trying to raise your energy level and your vibe, and they have a low one, and the two of you, it was kind of like two peas in a pod of sadness.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. And I wasn't around because I always worked out of town, so it wasn't, one where I could be there for them on a daily basis, just a phone call and visits and things of that sort, since my job always took me away from home, you
Yeah.
know?
And also, I want to add, not only me fighting what I'm fighting, I was also trying to take care of her, because I would be finding her passed out on the floor or whatever the issue was at that time, if dad wasn't home to help me. So yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know if
absolutely.
you've ever heard anything like that. Well, one ill person trying to take care of another ill person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually more common than what you would think, because it's such an environmental impact. You know, we have these, it's called the biopsychosocial. So there's like your social impacts, of environmental impacts, and biological through, you know, your DNA and things like that. So,
Yeah.
you know, we have all of these influences, but yeah, environment is such a huge factor. And hopefully over the course of the sessions that that we'll be chatting with each other, that we'll be able to inform your listeners on ways that they can help deal with environmental things and cope with environmental things, whether or not they're living with somebody who's got those issues or they're suffering themselves, because there's coping skills that we can help to manage the environment.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and absolutely. So let's talk about that. So we would, we're going to have Dr. Casey on with us, and y'all on our uh, podcast page, you can go on and you can leave an audio message for us, and leave it for us, and we will get back to you. And you can email us at, of course, they make me crazy at gmail.com. And we're gonna, we'd love to have you as a listener on and talking with us and Dr. Casey about your situation. If you don't want to do that, we would love for you to at least leave that message, leave your concern, leave your question, and then we can address it on the next episode. And that's what we're hoping to bring some value to you in regards to that. So she's going to be joining us often. So we not only want you to, hope that you listen, but, we hope that you're not alone in dealing with things, and we want to bring value, and we want you to be able, just as Dr. Casey said, we want you to implement some coping skills in your life, and we want to bring that to you, so you're not just looking out for your loved ones, but just as she said, you're looking out for your own mental health. And Before we wrap this up, Case, why do we always go to the negative right away when we think of like mental illness, mental health? Is it just human nature to go to negative before positive?
Well, it is human nature to go negative before positive. That's called the negative bias that we have. That's what psychologists call it. But there's a real negative stigma attached around mental health, and it's because we've been misinformed within the media and education as well. So, when we tend to hear that somebody has physical health, you would tend to think that somebody is in good health, that they're in good stead, if when we're talking about physical health. But for some reason, when we've been talking about mental health, people automatically go to the negative, and they automatically think of it as a disease or a condition or an illness. And so, mental health is actually really an umbrella term for all of mental health and well-being. And so, I would love to see that we start to look at mental health as a positive thing, just as we do physical health, just as we, go to the gym, or go for a run or eat healthy, and we're looking after our physical health. There's also things that we can do, daily, small little 1% things that can really help you stay happy and healthy and have a beautifully flourishing well-being if you do that. So I'd love for us to start as a global community, really looking at health as a proactive, positive response rather than negative.
Yeah, absolutely. So you heard her. She's going to have our backs. She's going to give us
Got
the
your back.
advice. She's going to give us the advice we need. We're going to uplift you. And so we really hope that you enjoy this podcast. And so how can they find you?
Yeah, great. So there's a couple of ways. You can go directly to my website, which is mentalhealthhacker.com, or you can head over to Insta or Facebook, and that is just at mental.health.hacker.
Okay, and we'll also have that in the outline of the podcast. So if that gets a little confusing, it'll be all typed up for you. So we'll leave it here. And thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait until you join us on the next episode of course, They Make Me Crazy. Those of us living with people suffering from mental illness have a lot to deal with too. They're not the only ones hurting. We hurt for them, and we carry their burdens because we love them. We're not social workers, and we don't have any professional training. We're just two girls who have lived through some things too. And we'd love to hear your story as well. Let's build a community. Email us at, of course, they make me crazy @gmail.com.